Okay, welcome everyone to Planning Board Subcommittee meeting on November 25th, 7 p.m. I guess we'll go over the minutes first. Did you two have a chance to look at the minutes? Apologies, I just sent them this morning.
I
These are from
just
our
saw
last.
them as I was coming into the meeting, but I did have a chance to read them, and I
Okay.
thought they were fine. And Jesse, I could say that you could even set yourself a one-page limit.
Yeah,
The trouble with us writing minutes is that I would say the trouble we are potentially overwhelmed by the level of detail that Chris has typically gone into. So I wouldn't object if you were.
understood.
He's just
I
even
I won't take credit. So Karen prepared these ones. I just did a little editing
okay.
on. That was very helpful.
Oh, well, I'll say the same to her. No, I thought they were
Yes.
fine. So I
Okay.
would, if we're ready, I'll move acceptance.
Sure. Fred, any comment on minutes or?
I thought they were fine as well, and I will second the motion.
Great. I guess we'll take a vote on approving the minutes. Bruce,
Yes.
Fred,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well. So minutes approved as they are.
Good.
Great. Thank you for that. So Nate did put up the sort of agenda, the same agenda we've sort of been having each time. Since I'm a little time limited tonight, I thought we should kind of just dive right in and go back over your idea, Fred, and talk about what would need to be, just the three of us can talk, and Nate can talk about if we think that idea has legs, and if so, what are the first steps, right? So, Fred, you just want to refresh us what you're really thinking?
Yeah. I my major issue with the legislation is the owner occupancy limitation or disallowance. And in Amherst, we know that owner occupancy is a very effective way of controlling behavior. And so I thought, well, all right, maybe there's a way to capture this, because the legislation does provide for site plan review. And so there is the opportunity to, shall we say, audit by a public body, probably be the planning board, in terms of compliance with the bylaw, which we would write. And the bylaw would say that in the event that an accessory dwelling is a student home, we'll use that phrasing as we would define it, then there has to be, shall we say, an adult presence. And the way we could work with that, I think we kind of invented that when we looked at 4555 South Pleasant Street back before Amherst College was going to staff it, before the latest development. And we said there's got to be an adult there that's responsible 24/7. And so I thought, well, okay, so we've invented that language. This might be a way to really solve some problems here.
So a couple questions before we take it further. So you're saying at the time the ADU is proposed to be built, right?
Yes.
But we wouldn't know, nor is there any way to know who's going to be renting it at that moment. Like an owner could just say, yeah, I don't know who's going to rent it. Or they could say, no, I'm going to rent to a family. And then once it's built, this wouldn't have any jurisdiction, right? Unless I'm missing a piece of it.
Well,
And this just occurred to me now, listening to you talk.
I mean, people can always, after the fact, violate the bylaw. And the zoning enforcement officer would be in a position to say, you know, in the event that it's a student home, that okay, where is the supervision?
Right. So it's and again, this just occurred to me just now. So this is a way potentially to give the town something to enforce should we have the means to enforce, which I think right now is not realistic. Nate can comment on that.
Yeah.
But I really like the idea of it. Yeah, Bruce, you want to add something?
I just to answer your question to Fred as well. I think this bylaw is essentially acts like a condition on a site plan review, which in fact was what I think the example that he's citing as the precedent was with wasn't exactly a condition, but it was something that the applicant added in the expectation that we would be positively impressed or positively persuaded by it. So the permit is granted to build the ADU without consideration of whether or who or what is going to occupy it. But as you say, in the fullness of time, the person who's building it knows that there's the presence of this particular bylaw. And I think the thing about this that would make it perhaps a little easier to enforce, I have other questions about this as well, but in this particular instance, something that might make it a little easier to enforce would be that it would only be, I mean, there'll be a red flag immediately that the let's say a applicant to build an ADU came for a project that was already student occupied, or for a building that was already non-owner occupied. That would be so that the commissioner could just kind of mark it as something that should be paid attention to if that was the case. So it wouldn't be. It seems to me that it wouldn't involve going around and looking at all of the properties, just the ones that were where building permit applications for an ADU were made by a non-owner occupying property. So I think theoretically it could be managed, but I don't know about the resources. I also think that the issue, can I move on to the second, or should I? Maybe I shouldn't. I'll let you respond, Justin.
Hang on 1 second. I'm still missing the timeline piece of when this could be enforced, I think, because we're saying, okay, there's already a rental house, single family house. That owner who doesn't live there comes to the town, says, I want to build an ADU. We have to let them build it, but then we're
Yes, I
saying
think so.
you need a site plan review. And at that moment, the planning board's going to say, well, remember, if this is going to be a student home, you then need a manager on site 24/7.
That's right. So the notice would be given the way Fred's proposing it. Yeah.
Right. And then
I mean, it would be, yeah.
They build the ADU.
Yeah.
They knowingly, or they either move into it because the first one's rented,
Yeah.
or they knowingly go against the bylaw and rent it out to someone else.
Now it could be, I mean, this is very unlikely, but it could be that the ADU is being built by the owner of a property that's rented, but they're building it for the renter that's already in there, who may not be students. And,
But I
because the
think,
person said they wanted an office and so forth. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
possible that, but that doesn't really matter. For the coherence of Fred's idea, there's a there's a
Yeah,
there's a process where
so
people can be given a heads up.
right, my reaction is that it won't change much from happening until the town decides and comes up with the means to try and enforce or not grant rental permits. And then the question is, if we don't grant rental permits, does that stop anybody from renting out either, right?
Well, I respond to that is that very often with these conditions on permits, they are to some degree, shall we say, disregarded. But um, but if if somebody complains, and they can be disregarded, and if there's no problems, in some respects, that's fine because the intent of the thing that Fred's proposing is to prevent
Yeah.
disruption, I think. And then if there are disruptive tenants, then there's a mechanism there to do something about it, rather than
Yeah,
just be
that's a good point. That's a good point.
yeah.
Nate, you want to add something?
Well, yeah, we already have the rental registration in place and bylaw enforcement. And so, I talked to the building commissioner after the last planning board meeting, and he said, we will never go in and ask someone if they're a student or not. Right. So there's really no way to verify it's a student home. We can put the question, it can be a voluntary response, but the enforcement of that is very difficult. And so I also think that going to the planning board just for this condition is not the best use of resources or staff or board time. And so if we wanted to have a condition about management, we could have that in the bylaw now. We already do. That's a abide by a management plan submitted to the building commissioner. If we want to put some more conditions on there or standards, we could without needing site plan review. It actually makes it more flexible and enforceable for the building commissioner to have the ability to do it without having a public hearing. Right, a site plan review, once it's done, it's done. It has to be amended through a public hearing. The building commissioner can always change, and make an enforcement order if the conditions aren't being met without a public hearing. And so it's actually a faster process. I'm just not sure the student home thing is actually going to work.
Yeah.
I just, at this point, and if I agree with Jesse, if we have a better mechanism and something's in place, and I think it would, at this point, I'm not sure it would.
Yeah. Fred, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Nate, I'm perfectly willing to, adjust this so that we don't overburden staff, and we can certainly craft a requirement in the bylaw that I take your point that doesn't mandate a specific site plan review finding, as long as there is some mechanism there that gets some supervision. If without that, we know exactly what is going to take place. This is not, and the people of this town know what is going to take place. And I'm reaching for something. What we've got right now is owner occupancy, and that's going to go away on February 2nd. So I think we've got to have something in its place. And I'm perfectly willing to work with how this is structured on paper, but I think we've got to do something that goes in this direction.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, Fred, but I've a couple different takes on it. I also wanted to point out, Nate, if what you were saying made me think we can do this without the student home definition. Why can't we just add to the bylaw? Basically, any multi-unit property has to have a management plan of including 24/7 manager. And that way, it gives the town just as much strength to act on something if it becomes an issue, whether it's students or non-students. Because I agree
Yeah,
with
so
Nate,
I-
we're never really gonna-
So the ZBA does that, but what, I guess the other crux then is like, what is a manager? And so oftentimes a landlord will anoint a tenant as the manager. And so, what I hear Fred saying is it needs to be an adult or 24/7, which seems odd to me if they can't live on the property. So is it just that there's a management company that's responsible for, 24/7, which a lot of the companies are now. And so, it just seems like, I understand the concern. It's just, right now, there's non-owner occupied duplexes with a special permit and they have to follow their management plan and the conditions of the permit. And if they don't, then there can be enforcement action. But we could write similar standards now into the bylaw and have them be enforced, but it doesn't necessarily require an adult. It's just a management plan with say it could be a 24/7 manager. But we don't really define what a manager is. I think that's going to be a hard part. Is it like, like a responsible adult? I mean, I don't.
But we did it somehow for the 45-55, right? I mean, I agree, it's a little
Right.
tricky. Sorry,
Right.
let me interrupt. I was derelict in my duties. I did not announce who was in attendance. So we have two attendees, Janet McGowan and Joseph Maskis. Apologies if I pronounced your name wrong. Unless there's objection, I would like to bring them over to be part of the conversation. Everybody comfortable with that?
I think that's fine.
Fred, objections? Are you okay with that?
No, it's fine.
So Janet and Joseph, I'm promoting you as panelists so we can see and talk to you. Hey, Janet.
As soon as you put me in, the cat showed up. I think I think
They
he
want to
just
be part of it too. That's okay.
like a star is born. So
Hi, Joseph. Welcome. Okay, so Bruce and then Janet.
Before I say what I say, Joseph, I'd like to know your affiliation. I saw something about Ithaca written in the Mirror. Are you local? We
Yeah,
usually ask people to give their addresses and so forth, Jesse, which we know Janet's address, but we don't know.
Thank you for
Joseph's.
pointing that out.
yeah. Hi, I'm Joe. That background is because I was interviewing for Ithaca College's PA school previously, so that was my default background. Lived here my whole life. Went to UMass. Currently work at UMass at the health services. So still here in Amherst.
Good. Welcome,
Okay.
Joseph.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Jesse, my comment was, I guess, firstly, we did something regarding adult supervision or whatever you call 24/7 manager for the project at South Pleasant Street, 40 to 50 South Pleasant Street. But that was a big project. So the nature of these single family houses or duplexes with ADUs, it's much smaller. So I don't think we can expect the same solution concept that can work at a place that's got 30 or so, 20 or 30 people living in it to also be appropriate to one that's got, I don't know, less than 10, or probably sometimes 5 or 6 only. And I guess, so maybe I should just stop there for a minute.
Well, maybe there's some other way to word it so it's a
Well,
management plan.
to continue, then I think that I think we have to address why we might think that the new rental bylaw that I believe, and I haven't read it, so I might need some briefing from Nate on this, but I think there's provisions in that rental bylaw that have to do with problem houses. I don't know what the phrase is, but houses that receive complaints. And so my question then, I think, well, it's not mine. I think it's the question that we would have to deal with here is why do we think that wouldn't be good enough? And if we have to answer that question in order to move forward, I think.
Gotcha. Janet, want to add something?
So I think the goal, there's like, I think you're looking at several goals. One of them is to make sure neighborhoods aren't inundated with student housing. And also to open up space in town for students, non-students to live, like faculty, staff, all sorts of regular folk, people who probably aren't as competitive in terms of paying rents. And so I think Fred's idea is a really interesting one. I do think we need a definition of a student home because all the proposals you're sort of talking about will work off of that. And I think it's not that hard to figure out if something's a student home or not, especially if somebody's renting, a landlord. And I've kind of gone back and forth in this. I can tell you exactly where my tenants live and where they go to school. I mean, I don't know. So that, but I think that, I have just heard this idea for the first time, and I was thinking, you could also have just a bylaw requirement, or I don't know if it's, that only one unit of the two can be used as a student home. Because it's very possible that, say I would consider, building an ADU and moving into it to sort of downsize and renting my house to students or other people. And so you're just trying to make sure you're not just keep the, like dilution is the solution. One house
Yeah.
can be a student home, 4 students, maybe 6, they get sort of stuffed in. But the other unit is non-student, and that's not a protected class. And, other university towns have definitions of student homes. They regulate student homes. A student home isn't necessarily bad, but what we're looking is to increase our housing stock for everyone. And so I think that would be a very doable proposal, and it could be a condition of a building permit that if one of the 2 units is rented as a student home, the other one cannot. And the building commissioner could enforce that. If this current commissioner feels like he can't, I think we should do is talk to other university towns and see how they do it, how they keep track of that. I just don't, I think it's very doable because we know towns and cities do that.
Thanks, Janet. Joe, I'll get you in a second. But Joseph, sorry. There's a third goal I just wanted to add to the mix. I agree with what you said, Janet, about maybe not having neighborhoods reach a certain density, increasing renters who are non-students. But the third goal to me is reducing the pressure of single-family properties to be purchased by developers for this purpose. Because I think this new change in the law is only going to increase that pressure because of the financial benefits. Nate, if you're still listening, do you have a response to Janet's idea about a bylaw that just says on a 2-unit property, essentially, only one of them can be a student home? Is that something that we could do, assuming the council was on board? Nate's at I think a hockey game, so he might not be here. Okay, we'll come back to that when we can. Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Janet said. I mean, if Amherst is legally allowed to do it, it can. I mean, I know when I was trying to rent at Halcourt Gardens on Halleck Drive, they just said back in 2020 they said they explicitly don't rent to undergraduate students. So at least I got the impression I don't think they're a protected class. I mean, I mean, it's up to town to decide like, hey, how aggressive and explicit do we want it to be in very defining, okay, students can live here, students can't live there, or here or there, and sort of restricting it in that respects. I mean, do we want single family homes to keep being bought out by landlords and pieced up room by room by room, or, I just think there's a lot of levels of control the town has that aren't being exercised. And I say this as a very, I'm 26. I was an undergrad student 4 years ago. I think that there's a lot of, more steps that can be taken in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Can I just say quickly? So students are not a protected class. but you can't say undergraduates because then it gets into age discrimination, although some undergraduates are older. So, I mean, and when I say you can't, I mean, that's, you're trying to stay away from that. And so Massachusetts courts might take a different thing, but age discrimination and age, no, but students are not a protected class.
Gotcha.
As long
Yeah,
as
I
we're
was sort of
talking-
trying to think about that as well.
as long as we're talking words, I think we need a different phrase also for manager or responsible party or something like that, and not adult, nothing with age in it either, because several of us also talk about an adult being there. So I guess we need a new word for that as well. Bruce, I think you're next.
I thought we were talking about the ADU bylaw and whether we were doing anything. And Janet should broaden that to duplexes and other things. So I want to make sure that we either
Good point.
are changing the agenda topic or we're focusing, because when you're only adding an ADU to a house, it's only one. Well,
So
I
I think,
suppose we
yeah, I think
recognize that it could.
sorry, I think I changed that conversation slightly when I suggested we could make it apply to all multi-unit properties.
Okay.
And then whether it's enforced or not.
Well,
becomes-
but
But you're right, the conversation.
I'm
did
having
start.
trouble figuring out where the ball is here.
Yeah, I mean, I
Because I'm
think.
swinging
I
my
think-
foot and the ball's not where I thought it was. So of course I'm not kicking very well. So I think to the extent that we're talking about ADUs, and I know at the planning board discussion that I think we mentioned that, well, you know, an ADU at 900 or 1,000 feet could, you know, conceivably have all sorts of, it could be a duplex effectively, but I don't want to be party to letting our imaginations get run away with us too far. We have seen that duplexes aren't as popular as we thought they might be. There haven't been a lot of them built. So first thought is maybe this is not a problem. Maybe we should at least be mindful until we know there's a problem that we have a problem. It may be that Fred's very concerned about the consequences of being able to build these things and in places where we don't have you know, basically the rental landlords can build an ADU and add one more student or two more into the ADU. It's a lot of work doing that for not a lot of return. I'm not sure that we're going to be flooded with this. It's not clear to me that this is the kind of problem that we have to get too jonesed about. Doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it, but I want to make sure that maybe I'm wrong. But my guess is that this is not as serious a problem as as what Janet's talking to about when we get single family houses that are being vulnerable to being taken up and vigorized in ways that are going to be very threatening to the abutters, who will then move, and you get a cascading effect. It's not clear to me that this ADU is going to drive the cascading effect that we've been concerned about on this other topic, which is why I want to make sure that they're not conflated. Well, not make sure, but why I think it's worth our while not to conflate them, because I think they represent different levels of threat. So maybe I should stop there and see whether that folks agree with me there or not.
Janet, your hand's still up, or is that?
Oh, I left it up, but I think that, I've been thinking for many years now is, to treat multifamily, housing the same. Who cares if it's a duplex or an ADU or a triplex or quadplex, like to have the same standards for each. And my suggestion has been just say no more than half the units can be a student home. I mean, the other minimum distance requirement, being, which we've also talked about and has been very effective in other towns, is saying only one student home per, I guess, 200 or 300 feet. Maybe the same effect, unless you had a triplex. But at least you'd have some space for people to live in between those houses. And I also do think there's a very boring temporizing effect of middle class and older people's lives on students. And so, we're just trying to make space in our community for people to live in it who are kind of a little more chill. And so I just think that, when I take Bruce's point, but I do think I would do that saying in a duplex, only one unit could be a student home or rented to students. If it was a triplex, I would say no more than half, or, just there has to be some way to reduce the incentive just to build something and stuff it with students. And I think the ADU thing, it's like, the cows are going to be out of the barn, the other thing with ADUs is that you can kind of, basically you could build an ADU, convert both units into a condo, and all bets are off. And, so you could have 2 student houses on the property, or, there's a lot of future things. So like, why not you just say, multifamily housing has to be can't be more than 50%, student homes or something. But if we wait, we're gonna have a lot of more, a lot of neighborhoods under having negative impacts. And so we have to start somewhere also.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Jen. It just feels a lot cleaner also to have a bylaw like that that applies throughout town, especially if we're admitting that the enforcement is pretty dubious at this moment, that it's just a mechanism in place in case there are problem properties, is really what we're talking about, right? At least in this current moment.
Yeah, or you could have a building department who took it seriously and enforced it.
Right, we could
Yeah,
get there.
That's a
But I think
political problem.
at the moment, we're not there, yes, so yes.
Yeah, I mean, we need a legal lever, but, but someone could pull it at some point.
It gives us the legal lever, that's correct. Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, let's see, first of all, I like Janet's idea of, if you add an ADU, on that parcel, it can't be more than half, the student home. Only one of those, in the case of one becoming 2, only one can be a student home. That's a clean and simple way to go about it. I want to be very careful about broadening that. I am the owner occupant of a 3-family house, and believe me, the 2 other tenancies are student homes, and they are not problems. And they won't be, and they haven't been for 52 years. So, and that's a ratio of 1 to, 1 out of 3. So, I said an adult living there, that was kind of a joking term.
Yeah.
But I think people understood where I was going.
Sure.
Yeah, I think anything that we do with the accessible dwelling unit bylaw, I think we have got to have this somehow part of the package. And I'm interested in Nate's position about maybe making it just part of the bylaw. We can talk about that, but somehow it's got to be part of the package, or all hell breaks loose on February 2nd.
So what about flipping the wording a little bit, having at least one of the units has to be non-student home? That way, 1 of 3, 1 of 6, 1 of 10, whatever, it gets a non-student resident on the property.
Yeah.
Joseph, go ahead.
It would help.
Yeah, I guess instead of inverting that, I just wanted to circle back to saying that I really like Janet's proposal. Very simple and clean, maintains a good ratio. Yeah, I just think that'd be a good thing to weave into the bylaw. I don't really have many other Any other comments on that? I mean, ensuring at least 50-50 or at least one of two with ADUs. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd
thanks.
I'd back that.
Bruce?
I'm going to go right back to where I left off, which is who disagrees with me that this is not as likely to be. This is a different order of problem. And Fred, when you say all hell breaks loose on February the 2nd, I emphatically disagree with you because I don't think that's the problem. I don't think all hell is going to break loose on February the 2nd. But you do, and so we are in different realms here. I just wanted to make that point that I don't feel as strongly. We'll see who's right about this because a year from now we'll know the answer. Secondly, or maybe firstly, if we're going to proceed with this, we need this student home definition. I think those minutes that we just reviewed, Jesse, indicated that we discussed. It may have been me who suggested that we needed the student home definition. It may not. It may have been just that I said that it should be called a student home than a student house. But nonetheless, when I either made that suggestion or supported it, the thought was not that we had a particular need immediately in the bylaw for a student home. It's just that we may need to, and it should be something that in this town we should have a definition of, because we may decide that it will be necessary. Rob Morrow might go away and the next guy comes in or lady and says, I can't believe that you people haven't got a definition of student home. Then we don't have to work for a year to get it.
Yeah.
So I think my initial advocacy for this definition was that it wasn't tied to any particular thing we're going to do, where the student home definition could be refuted or resisted because it was a mechanism for doing something. I was hoping that we would just do it without there being any mechanism attached to it, so we could simply do it in abstract. I think that's probably not a bad idea. But it's also interesting to hear Fred characterize, for you to characterize your house as a student home, because I actually don't think it is. And we should look at the definition as you've presented it so far, Jesse, to see whether Fred's house would fit the definition or wouldn't, because I don't think it really is, essentially because it has an owner occupancy to it. But
I never,
Okay.
I never said my domicile is a student home. That's.
you
where
said
I
that
live,
there
and
was
I'm not, but
you said you
the
used
other
the
two
phrase.
apartments are both occupied by graduate students.
I know, but you said they were student homes. That's
Yes.
what you said, and I
Yeah.
thought interesting because to the extent that you use that phrase in association with the portions of your house, which are apartments, it's not like they're living in your house like they do with Bill and Connie Gillen. So I just think it tests our definition a bit, your situation, and I found that useful. That's all.
Yeah. So, Joe, give me one sec. Bruce, I totally agree that I think we should have the definition of the bylaw. And I've been stalling on bringing it forward because I had a couple conversations, I don't know, a month ago, 6 weeks ago, that made me think that would also get a lot of resistance.
The definition would.
Yes, without a purpose, and that it would be construed as only a negative use and a discriminatory use.
Okay.
And so it made me think maybe we do need to wait until we have a purpose that we think has a chance at getting through the various councils that we need to get to. I could be wrong, and we should decide as a group, either us or the full board, if
Well,
we think we can convince council we need the definition without a purpose. But
well,
maybe this is exactly the right moment to try and tie it to a purpose if we come up with
I guess that's
something.
true. You've spoken to the to probably some of the fractions of the community that might be that might object to it with or without a purpose.
I could
And I'm
go
doing I'm just using what I think is the logic of
and
this
again, I
town
agree with you.
not having
I
a
agree with
student
you
home definition.
completely. I agree, yes, but I'm thinking more strategically, like what's gonna make
Yeah.
it happen, right? But I could be wrong also. Joe, go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention it's not necessarily going to be not to forestall the conversation much longer, but it's not necessarily all hell breaks loose on February and the law changes. It's more always like this type of zoning changes and housing bylaw changes always have knock-on effects in like the next 5 years, and the next 5 years is going to be this way or it's going to be another way depending on if the decision is made by February 2nd. And usually with this sort of things like procrastinating them can maybe lead to not as desirable things down the line, or at least losing the opportunity to sort of set a groundwork for the next 5 years or 10 years. This sort of thing, it's just going to kind of have knock-on effects down the line.
Janet, go ahead.
So, I'm not taking a study on this, but my impression is that the ZBA has turned down several duplexes because they thought they were going to become just 2 units for students and would have a negative impact on the neighborhood. And I've been thinking about sending to the ZBA saying, why don't you just say no more than 1 unit can be a student home? Because that's what you're trying to get at, right? You're trying to keep the neighborhood stable, you're trying to increase housing, but you're trying not to, drop 8 students on, a quiet neighborhood. So I don't know, maybe this is the way to start, is people are a little nervous and kind of panicking about the ADU. We all felt good about the ADU. I mean, Amherst has been way out in front in letting ADUs, as long as there's owner occupancy, we probably have the most generous ADU things. You can't really accuse us of being anti-density, but maybe this is the change of saying, and I've written this on a listserv of planners. It's like that ADU change really hits differently when you're in a college town, because it will be a tremendous incentive to developers to buy a small single family home like the many ranches in my neighborhood, get an ADU and fill it with 2 students. I mean, I've seen all these ads for sale for small ranches. The developer has bought the house, added an extra bathroom, and it's listed, the real estate, it's like investors' opportunity. And these are little neighborhoods all around me. And so I think this is going to be something that's going to be very interesting to people, that they can make an extra $3,000 or $4,000 a month on a property that is pretty cheap to buy.
Yeah.
So I think maybe this is a place to start.
I agree, and just to flesh out my thoughts a little, Bruce, I don't think the problem houses are going to greatly increase. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm mostly worried about what Janice is bringing up, that the pressure for single family houses to flip is just going to go through the roof because of this. Because I see it also. This week, literally, I had 4 calls of cash offers on my other properties, like random cold calls from investment groups. And I am 100% certain that's what they would do, right? This has been going on for years, but just coincidentally this week, like they're
So
at it again.
you think this will be the easier route so somebody buys and wants to flip, and in the process they're going to quickly put an ADU in the back as part, and it'll be that'll change the standard pattern. Is that what you're sensing, Jesse?
Yes, and it will just increase the percentage of rental properties, period. Whether they're a problem or not. Again, I don't think it'll be more problems. I think it'll just be less permanent residents. That's my concern.
Well, that's a compelling argument that it'll add fuel to the fire, essentially, of property flipping, of somebody just taking a regular house and thinking that they can buy it as an investment for
Correct.
student rentals. And in the process, they will think that by adding a duplex, they can, now
Yeah,
that,
because if
that,
someone's gonna buy,
well,
someone's
that's
gonna buy my
interesting.
rent for 300K, sure, they have another 50K to, or whatever, 70K to build another unit, right?
My sense is that to buy a house and paint it inside and do a few things and then maybe put a bigger driveway in and go through the Rental Registration Act is maybe even a couple of order of magnitude less complicated than in that same process adding the construction of an ADU in the back. So I'm intrigued. I'm interested. I understand, I think, what you're suggesting, and I think and I'm just trying to process whether I think that the person or the entity that would be interested in buying and converting would be more or less likely to add an ADU in the process. And
They could also do it a year later or 2 years later after they've established cash flow, right? So, I mean, I'm not sure it would be the immediate consequence, but it definitely increases the financial incentive, the how lucrative these properties are or could be.
And so then we ask ourselves, because the other alternative could be, particularly if the parcels are big enough, and some of them are, that you can put a second principal primary use in the back.
But that has to go through ZBA, right? Whereas this now ADU by right, you don't. So
Okay.
it's just much quicker and easier for someone to do that.
Okay, now we're beginning to structure the problem. Okay, so I guess we should be responding by structuring the problem the way we've said it, so that we know what we're talking about. And then, but then we have to decide whether we expand it to Janet's conception is a more general. It includes what you've just described, but it includes other things as well. And we have to decide whether we want to focus on just the ADU fraction of it, or whether we want to, and
Yeah.
maybe we can do both. Maybe we start with one and with an idea that
Right,
this
we can
this
certainly
solution
start
can
with
be
ADU.
is part of a generalizable.
I don't, Fred,
Okay.
one second. I'm sure Janet or Bruce, you know much better than I do. With either of these options, what's the process for adding something to the bylaw? So we propose it, planning board then pushes it to council. That's correct? And then they have to have a hearing about it and vote on it? Or
I
then
imagine
they're
it's the same as
back?
the overlay. I mean,
Okay.
the overlay is changing the bylaw, and so, but I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a kind of a de minimis kind of thing where certain changes can be done in a more streamlined
That's what I'm
process.
trying to parse
I
out.
don't
So
know
maybe
the
we can
answer to
talk with
that.
staff. Yeah, maybe we can talk with staff at the next full board meeting about,
Yeah. Is Nate
Like-
looking after his family? Is that what's going on?
yes, I think he's at a
Yeah.
hockey game, so he's kind of not really plugged in.
Okay. Hey,
I'm-
Nate, is
I'm
it
he-
half time
I'm
yet?
listening. Any bylaw change would require a vote of council, so there's no kind of bylaw change. I think, I mean, the idea of having, saying, I would just keep whatever to want the ADU bylaw. I think it just gets really complicated if we try to extrapolate and apply it to everything else in the bylaw. But, if
At
you
once.
when saying once in home and an ADU property makes sense, like I said, I think the difficulty would be defining it and then enforcing it, but it's a clean way. There's questions about who's a student. Is it graduate student? Is it,
Well, but our
older adults who are
definition-
students? And so,
I mean, it is, and our definition doesn't specify what
Yeah.
kind of student, and that's fine.
right. Yeah, I mean, that would be the cleanest way. But, so right now we do have for the planning board next week, a revised draft bylaw, which is just 1 ADU on a property by right with like 20 general conditions. There's no site plan review. right? It's just, it meets the letter of the law with, you know, a fair amount of conditions. And so I guess the question would be, you know, how much more do we want to work on it? Or, you know, would the board recommend it to council knowing it's going to come back and it still could be revised after that?
Yeah,
You know, it
I'm
won't,
gonna,
right? It's still like maybe April.
sure. I'm gonna try and write something that we can and send to the full board before next week's meeting to propose adding a sentence about this, and I'll write a justification for why. Obviously, you guys can have input on that.
Yeah.
Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that probably the best way is to do this at you know, if you're adding an ADU at most one, both can't be student homes on the property, something like that, and define student home. And just limit this to the accessory dwelling unit changes, because this is what is right on the table courtesy of the legislature. The legislature has said that our bylaw is now obsolete in this regard, and we have to fix it.
So Fred,
And so I think we just do this just for ADUs, and it with the knowledge that the approach could be broadened, you know, in the forthcoming year. But I think this should be part of the package that we send to the council on responding to the legislature.
I agree. I like the plan. Bruce, you
Well,
got something?
yes, because what Fred's talking is a big lift, because especially relative to what Nate just said, which is like the thing is more or less ready to roll, because it involves folding in the definition of student home, and then and then how we want to.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
sorry. I thought because you said you only had an hour, I thought you might have had an hour set on the on the Zoom,
No,
and it might have
I'll-
just
I'll let you know.
crashed.
I'll let you. Sorry, keep talking. I just wanted to share this so we could look at it maybe quickly
Yeah.
together.
So so Jesse, I think what has to happen is we can't talk about this at the planning board meeting. There has to be language. The what comes before the planning board, I think, has to be a drafted version of what we're talking about, so that we can review the language as well as the intent.
Agreed. But I think the ADU bylaw simply needs a one sentence addition.
Which
Basically
is,
what Janet said, which is only one of the two units can be a student home. And then we also have to provide the definition of the student home. Now,
okay,
whether the planning board, it's going to take 3 hours.
let's see how that goes.
Right?
Yep, let's see how that goes.
I mean, I'm willing to try it, and maybe.
Yes,
the
I
planning board will
could
say,
support
"Sorry,
that.
we're not gonna touch it."
Because I can support that mostly because if you're correct, we get some serious reflection on defining what a student home is.
Yeah.
Or,
I
So
agree.
this is where we were last we discussed it as a subcommittee. And this was the language that went to the full planning board, and I did not receive any feedback, although we never had a chance to discuss it with the full planning board. But we also didn't propose a purpose at the planning board yet. Yeah. So I'm happy to send this around so you can consider it a little more deeply again. I do have to go in a couple of minutes. Fred, is your hand still up, or was that from before?
That was I forgot to lower it.
Okay,
I think it's, well, we've looked at this a lot, and I don't think it's going to be, I think it's, if we are serious about this, and I'm supporting us being serious about this, it is now up to other people in the chain of decision to tell us what they think. I think we could, I don't think there's any need to spin this one any further, because basically it was a functioning decision from another jurisdiction with a similar set of problems to ours. So what I think we can do is we can find out what people's objections to it might be, and we can presumably call the guy at State College and say, well, our community thinks this. Did you ever think this? And if you did, how did you get around
Yeah,
it? Because they
that's
obviously
right.
did.
Okay, so I will, I'll try and have some back and forth with Nate if he's willing,
Yep.
over the
Okay.
next few days of work, and have something to propose for the full board to consider.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yes, thank you all. Joseph, nice to meet you. I hope you'll come
Mhm.
back. Janet, good to see you.
Thank you.
And
Happy,
Brad and Bruce, thanks a lot. Have a great Thanksgiving,
happy
everyone.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Have a good
See you all
holiday.
next week.
Take care.
Nice conversation. Thanks, bye.